I think everyone's had the experience of doing a wire transfer using Swift in some way. 2% of global transfers have actually moved to stablecoins. My sense is that Swift is worried about, okay, how does this new technology fit into what we're doing? And is it a credible replacement to sort of the existing system of international wire transfers?
So how do you see regulators or policymakers see Swift's interest in stablecoins, and whether do you see any impact of that in the upcoming regulations?
I expect the US administration to be pretty favorable when it comes to integrating things like USDT or USDC or any sort of USD denominated stablecoin. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they respond if there's a meaningful number of users in the US that start to begin to denominate their wealth in other currencies. There is one big catalyst that could make that happen, which is
Hello everyone. Today I'm joined by Mr. Magnus Mareneck, co-CEO of Cosmos Lab, the team behind the Cosmos blockchain ecosystem. And today he'll be discussing with us the role of Swift and its interest in the blockchain system, and how stablecoins are trying to replace the traditional Swift system, and how it could uh, get get the best of the decentralized ecosystem. So to start off, Mr. Magnus, how do you see the Swift's interest in the uh, blockchain and decentralized ecosystem? What are your views on that?
Yeah, so I think at a very high level, Swift is concerned. So Swift manages, trillions of dollars of payment volume across the world, basically every year. And, generally, I think everyone's had the experience of doing a wire transfer using Swift in some way. Oftentimes they cost about $25 to $50 when you're actually transferring dollars sort of between different countries. And increasingly, I think the latest stats is about 2% of global transfers have actually moved to stablecoins, right? Which represents, probably the first real credible threat to something like Swift in a very long time. And so my sense is that Swift is worried about, okay, how does how does this new technology fit into what we're doing? And is it a credible replacement to sort of the existing system of international wire transfers? So I've seen Swift, begin to start partnerships with different parties in the stablecoin space. So just recently, they started a partnership with a company called Programmet, which is in Japan, where basically they are combining the use of IBC, which is the interoperability protocol that we use here at Cosmos, with Swift to try to make a seamless rail between international wire transfers and then stablecoin payments on the blockchain side. So I think we're going to see more and more of these as time goes on.
So talking about the regulatory point of view right now from here on, like when major player traditional giants like Swift try to enter into the stablecoin market, or when stablecoin regulations are at the pivotal moment in US. So how do you see regulators or policymakers see Swift's interest in stablecoins, and whether do you see any impact of that in the upcoming regulations?
Well, I think everybody knows that the U.S. regulatory regime right now here, I'm based in New York here, and we're tracking this closely, is extremely favorable, right? I think the U.S. Is trying to figure out how can we enable stablecoins in a way that essentially protects the supremacy of the U.S. dollar. Because the U.S. dollar has been a reserve currency for, basically since World War II. And I think in doing that, they're curious how they can essentially move forward stablecoins that are denominated in dollars without sort of improving or really moving forward or giving a chance for stablecoins denominated in non-dollar currencies. Right. And so I think you've seen the administration take a much less favorable stance towards things like CBDCs, for example. So, I mean, I think when it comes to Swift, I expect the U.S. administration to be pretty favorable when it comes to integrating things like USDT or USDC or any sort of USD denominated stablecoin. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they respond if there's a meaningful number of users in the US that start to begin to denominate their wealth in other currencies, right? Which hasn't historically happened, but there is one big catalyst that could make that happen, which is the new tariff regime, right? One of the best quotes that was coming out around the whole recent tariff collapse was "There's no tariffs on Bitcoin," right? Which is true. And I think if we start to see trade happen in stable coins and sort of avoid the different tariffs that are happening in the U.S., that I think might actually completely change the current administration's stance on how they view stable coins and how permissive they've been.
So, expanding on the regulatory point, when stable coins like currently stable coins like USDT and USDC are quite popular. USDC is particularly compliant with the US regulators, NYDFS, and most regulations available in the market, but USDT isn't. So, what specific compliance strategy should show us in the, next phase adopt to mitigate those risks? Like USDT has mentioned that they would try to focus on a US specific stablecoin launch, and since they were delisted in EU, so for the new issuers, what do you think should be the more important focal points for getting regulatory approval?
Yeah. So if you break down the Genius Act, which is the piece of legislation that roughly governs the launch and usage of stablecoins, there are a couple key pieces of it, right? One of the first ones is around KYC and AML. So AML means anti-money laundering, and KYC means know your customer, and they're inherently linked and deeply embedded into the U.S. financial system. So what the U.S. is trying to avoid and has major regulatory entities that constantly police this is essentially U.S. dollars being used to fund terrorist activities or to fund drug trafficking or human trafficking or some of these very black market industries. And I think one of the things that has plagued a couple of the older stable coins, in particular USDT, is their currency is so widely used, right? And it's become popular in many different jurisdictions, and it wasn't born in the US, that there are holders and there are exchanges that deeply integrate USDT that don't follow the US's standards of KYC and AML. So I think in particular where you've seen this is in the integration with Binance, where Binance has fixed a lot about its system, but historically Binance was a little bit more open, I would say, and other exchanges were a little bit more open about accepting customers without major triple checks identification and things like this, and that led to a couple embarrassing situations, right? So I think that's part of it, right? Is how good is your compliance, right? Are you willing to actually put in the effort to really understand who your customers are and where money movements are? I think the second thing is honestly, there's a big Made in USA movement going on here in the States right now. And it is challenging for, I think, companies that are not headquartered in the US or have their operations in the US and are investing in the US to get favorable or let's say gentle treatment from the administration, especially when there exist competitors that are here, like Coinbase, like USDC, that are much more able to sort of talk to the administration and make the case that, hey, we grew up here, we want to lead this industry, and we know that the US wants to take a lead on this industry as well. So, if I had to advise any new stablecoins, I would say definitely have a presence in the US if you're expecting good treatment from the US, right? And talk to the regulators here, because the truth is, this story is not fully told, right? The story is getting told every day and getting figured out every day. And, the guys on Congress don't know what they're doing, except they're learning, right? And they're trying to understand how this technology works.
Right. Yeah. So proximity to the US is like the early key to the US markets, I guess.
I think so.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So in light of the recent market downturn, right? So there were rumors about Athena's USD depegging on Binance, although it was more to do with the liquidity providers and the API issues. So when you talk about stablecoin pegs, what metrics or early warning system would you recommend for monitoring such depegs? Or do you think the broader DeFi market liquidity would be impacted by that?
So, having been through the Terra collapse and having been heavily affected by that, I do think we've matured a lot as an industry. I don't think many people believe the story of non-fully backed stablecoins. And I think people are extremely skeptical when storing their money in stablecoins around how those reserves are kept. I think this is actually a very great outcome of legislation as well, where legislation is oftentimes the enforcer behind. Okay, you have to show us that you are backing this with some kind of liquid asset, right? And so I think the Genius Act definitely is an improvement in that direction, and it has put some very popular stablecoins under pressure, right? Like USDT has historically had issues with auditors around showing the full extent of their balance sheet, which I think has raised a lot of questions for people about why aren't you willing to do this? I think that the truth is there is an incentive for stablecoin issuers, even if it might be painful for them, to make it as easy as possible to offload their stablecoins into dollars and to have users go through the experience of taking their stablecoins and then redeeming the underlying collateral so that they know that that's a possibility. I think this is very easy when you think about USDC, because you can quickly transfer it to Coinbase and then withdraw the dollar. Uh, I think with USDT, it's a little bit more convoluted, at least from my experience. And I think other stable coins, it's not so much even a possibility, or there's a major fee associated with it. And I think it's really important to have give users that experience of, okay, if this thing trades under a dollar, over a dollar, whatever it is, I can always withdraw it for $1. So a great case in point of that was the USDC depeg that happened last year, right? It was almost people were laughing about it because they felt so confident that USDC was backed 1-to-1. And so when people were panic selling at 80 cents or 70 cents, a lot of people bought that token and then withdrew it for $1, right? A lot of people didn't doubt, and that restored the peg. I think the question is with a stable coin where there are more fancy activities at play. So let's say an Athena, right, which doesn't just back their stable coins 1-to-1, but also tries to take advantage of structural perpetual longs on different perps exchanges to provide higher sources of yield. I think that's when the story can get more confusing in the moment, where when you see that 80%, you're wondering, okay, what about all that fancy financial stuff that you're doing? And so I think especially for those stable coins, it's really important to enforce, hey, this is how you go and redeem this for $1.
Yeah, right. I mean, yeah, that was a insightful into the regulatory side of it and the depegging structure of it. So moving on to the next question, I would like to ask you about the interoperability challenges. Like we have so many stable coins today on different chains, and it is being continuously integrated into DeFi systems. So earlier, I mean, interoperability among DeFi protocols was a big thing with cross-chain bridges coming into actions. Do you think we'll see something similar developments in case of stable coins as well, with so many stable coins currently in the market? What interoperability challenges do you think we face today, and what could be the possible solutions for those?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And honestly, one that the industry is not thinking about too deeply right now. So I think interoperability and what I would argue as the as a general category of infrastructure around stablecoins is sorely lacking. Right now, I think a number of companies are rushing to launch their own stablecoins without thinking about, okay, well, how does this actually fit into the, the puzzle that is crypto today? Except for one player, I would argue, or perhaps two players. The first one is USDC, which has the interoperability solution around CCTP. And then the second one is sort of the USDT zero with the layer zero partnership with USDT or Tether. And I think so. The truth is, stablecoins, especially these stablecoins, are centralized, right? They have their stores that are owned by a single company. Those stores, yes, might be audited and might be very freely available or pressure testable by people who are holding them. But at the end of the day, they are centralized. They are not decentralized like a Bitcoin, Ethereum, or a Cosmos, right? But what that does mean is that there is a huge opportunity for the issuers of the stablecoin to build interoperability protocols that are better than decentralized bridges, at least from a user experience standpoint. And that's what CCTP and I would argue USDT zero do, right? They make it very easy to transfer stablecoins between different chains, albeit in a centralized manner. So, for example, if you use CCTP, then you are able to essentially mint and burn your USDC between two different chains in very fast amount of time, one block usually, versus waiting for the entire finality of, let's say, Ethereum or for multiple different checks to clear, those kinds of things. And the way that they do this today is they use market makers. So what will happen is, if you have two chains, you will lock your tokens on one chain. A market maker will see that lock and then immediately issue it on your destination chain, right? And then over time, your tokens will slowly go to the other chain. But at that point, you already have your money. And so your money just goes to paying back the market maker. And this has led to, I think, a very fast, very cheap experience. And the reason why it's so cheap for market makers is because they don't have to hold a risky asset on either side. They just have to hold USDC reserves, which they're more happy to do and take a much smaller fee on because they're stable, right? Whereas when market makers supply that same kind of cross-chain liquidity for Bitcoin or for Ethereum or for Atom, it is much more challenging. Because they have to hold the inventory and take on the risk of that asset going down. So my hypothesis is actually almost all bridging is going to be deprecated for more open systems and more fast-moving systems, especially for transferring stablecoins. In particular, one thing to chat about is we built a permissionless bridging system called IBC here in Cosmos. It's the most used bridge by volume and historical volume. And what we see is a lot of new companies that want to issue stablecoins are building in Cosmos or building on top of Cosmos rails because they want to leverage IBC and turn it into something that looks like CCTP. So, for example, they can launch a stablecoin themselves that they issue, and then they can build a IBC connection from their chain to, that they have their stablecoin on to every other chain. And then they can run a market making system on top of that and then use IBC to settle the transactions underneath. And because IBC is so cheap, right, basically costs nothing, and that you own the entire rails and you don't have to have any third parties involved, it makes that experience almost democratized for every single stablecoin issuer. So I think we're going to see a lot more of those kinds of bridging techniques. And I think we're going to see at some point over 95% of all bridging volume in crypto be denominated in stablecoins.
So yeah, as you mentioned about the scalability side of it and the importance of scalability in stablecoin transactions, what stablecoin scalability solutions do you think will be the main adoption part in the next leg. Like there are layer two rollups, there are zero knowledge proofs. So, what do you think are the most viable solution for handling enterprise level adoption?
Yeah. So when you think about scaling in the context of blockchain, I think most of the time we focus on vertical scaling, right? So this is how do we make the existing chains bigger and faster, right? This is the Solana increase bandwidth, reduce latency roadmap, or the Ethereum, proof of stake, and then to increasing the gas and blobs and all these different things. And then on the other side is the horizontal scaling story. So how do we actually just create more blockchains, right? And this is the L2 roadmap, but even more so, it's the Cosmos roadmap, I would argue. So I obviously have a opinionated take here, which is why I am in building Cosmos, which is that vertical scaling is not the solution, and that horizontal scaling is much more natural. If you look at the creation of the internet, we're not trying to make a single server massive and be able to have more parallel threads and more input output and increase its bandwidth and reduce its latency. We're trying to build more server data centers around the world so that we can handle and horizontally scale the internet depending on where it needs to go. And that was really the archetype that fueled the Cosmos story, right? Which was, okay, the truth is every person who wants to build a blockchain wants something different. Most people actually don't benefit from all the decisions made by any one chain like Solana, Ethereum, or Bitcoin. So why don't we make a very easy toolkit for them to spin up their own, right? And to essentially have all the pieces that another blockchain has in terms of interoperability, in terms of fast performance, in terms of strong security, in terms of full programmability, and let them sort of take it where they want to. So I think to some degree, the multi-chain vision, right, the idea that there would be a lot of different blockchains, which came, which was a Cosmos addition to the story around 2019, has become the truth, right? At the time, it was considered a crazy idea. Who would ever want to use something other than Ethereum, right? But now we have over, I think at the latest point, 500 to 1,000 different blockchains, likely more that we don't know about. And, many new things are launching as their own L1. Monad, Barachain, Tempo, Arc, right? Stable, all these different things. And so I think at a minimum, what you're going to see is you're going to see a further explosion of L1 blockchains. One thing that has been interesting to notice is that the L2 story, which we took very seriously about 2 years ago, has not really played out. I think people overestimated the value of Ethereum-based security or Bitcoin-based security, and they found that actually many of the restrictions that you have as an L2, if you just build an L1, which is not much harder, then you can just sort of have your own thing, right? And then you can import security even if you want to, but you have more flexibility and you also have a perception of being more sovereign and independent. And I think when it comes to enterprise, which is where we're focusing at Cosmos Labs in terms of adoption, there are a couple things that make L1s make a lot of sense in particular. And we came to this with an open mind. We were curious. We thought L2s might make sense, or we thought Validiums might make sense, or smart contracts. At the end of the day, the reason they like L1s are they like to run all of their own infrastructure, right? They like to understand deeply who is running the chain because they have compliance requirements and they can't have random people run the chain, right? They can't have random people run their infrastructure because if something happens, whoever's deciding that would probably either go to jail for malfeasance or they would be heavily investigated and definitely fired, right? So they like the idea that, okay, we don't have to depend on anyone else here. We can run our infrastructure ourselves, or we can open it up to partners we trust, right? That have already gone through our own KYC and compliance checks, right? So like their vendors, for example. That's the first thing. And that's only really possible with an L1, where you could run your own validator set. The second thing is usually companies don't want their own blockchains to be fully independent from their existing business, which means they don't want it just to exist on an island and have its own wallet system and block explorer. They want it to be deeply integrated into their existing company operations, which usually means they want to use their existing login system to create wallets, right? They don't want to have some, MetaMask experience. They want to have, all of their existing compliance, tax, and accounting solutions applied to transactions on the blockchain. And they don't want to introduce a new token, right? They usually have a stock. And so it's very confusing for them to have a token that can float on a blockchain when at the end of the day, they have a shareholder commitment to driving value to their own stock, right? And so if you launch a L2, right, you have to suddenly introduce Ethereum into your balance sheet to some degree. And if you launch a smart contract, you definitely have to introduce different tokens to your balance sheet. If you launch an L1, you actually don't have to launch a token at all. Because if you control the validator set, or at least if you can dictate the rules of the chain, you can just say, hey, we don't want any token. We don't want any gas, right? We just want this to be a technology. So those are two things. And the last thing I would say is interoperability. Usually companies do not build in isolation. They have a series of vendors, of API integrations, and of partner customers and competitors that they want some kind of interface with. And it's very challenging for them to understand how to do this. And so having a ready-made technology, whether that is IBC or whether that is CCIP or something like that, that they feel like they can influence, is usually super important for them making their final decision.
Yeah, that was a great point about L1 and why it has a better chance at success than L2s. Now, talking about the innovation and the trade-offs that comes with that innovation, how should stablecoin community balance that rapid innovation with the, let's say, yield-bearing stablecoins with, let's say, robust security audits, given there were so many high-profile exploits in 2024. So, how do you think the ecosystem balances that innovation with the security trade-offs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the truth is, we don't, as users, oftentimes get to see as much of the security properties of these stablecoins as we might want to, right? Because most of the stablecoin story, especially for the large players, is hidden behind a company, right? And it's not on chain. It's not in the form of smart contracts. Usually the smart contract interfaces are quite simple to understand and usually very auditable. And I think most of the time, that's not where the exploits happen. The exploits seem to happen in the behind the scenes operations. So I think we saw that recently with Pi USD, which this was not PayPal's fault, but it was the fault of Paxos. They accidentally minted $300 trillion of their own stablecoin, out of thin air, and then immediately burned it. However, I think immediately raised the question of, wow, they can do whatever they want, right? And this is not the dollar, right? This is something else. We can't mint $300 trillion. And even if the US wanted to, they would have to go through a years-long process to get the approval to do that. And it would completely disrupt global trade. But Paxos did that in a blink of an eye, right? And so I think the reality is stablecoins are only as good as the trust that people have in them. As soon as that trust erodes, they can quickly vanish, right? We saw this happen with UST Terra, which was a tragic event where $40 billion of market capitalization of the UST token, and I was affected by this too, vanished within the course of 2 days, right? And so we know the impact of what it looks like when people stop trusting these things. And I think one thing that might happen, and this is really on crypto users to demand this, is full traceability and auditability of these tokens. And over time, perhaps moving more and more of that collateral on chain, right? So the leader here, I would argue, is DAI, to MakerDAO's token, where they have an extremely sophisticated and rigid accounting mechanism to back their stablecoin, not just one-to-one, but oftentimes much higher with on-chain assets that are, programmably liquidatable in the case of a run on DAI. And I think that's a really nice counterpoint to a lot of the more centralized stablecoins we're seeing today. And the truth is, companies don't have to do centralized stablecoins, right? I think centralized stablecoins are exciting because they give banks and they give companies more of the ability to do funny operations behind the scenes, right? As we all know, bank accounts are never one-to-one backed with collateral, right? Oftentimes it's 20% backed, and that 80% is getting loaned out to other folks, right? And so I think if you have a stablecoin where you have to prove one-to-one backing, that's actually very restrictive on banks that want to issue their own stablecoins. But I think at a minimum, having some kind of auditability around this stuff is really important. And again, this is where legislation comes in, right? I think the biggest unlock for stablecoins will be if we can get FDIC insurance on at least one stablecoin, right? Because the way that the US government guarantees that, okay, don't worry about the fact that the bank only has 20% of your money. We will back $250,000 on a per account basis, right? That makes you sort of forget about the problem because you trust the government, right? And maybe crypto people don't trust the government, and that's a separate problem. But for most people, they trust the government. And so I think if we could get FDIC insurance on some of these stablecoins, that would be a real game changer in terms of what we can start to do and the trust that people have in them.
That was very insightful again. So for my final question, I'd like you to explain what you guys are doing at Cosmos with the, as you mentioned, IBC protocol. What do you see and vision more stablecoins getting integrated or built into the Cosmos hub and make it a liquidity center? Or what are the future plans for like Cosmos stablecoin focus?
So just to introduce Cosmos for a second, since not everyone knows about it sometimes. Cosmos is the internet of blockchains. It is a technology stack that began development in about 2017, and today is the most used technology stack in crypto when it comes to building your own chain. So it has over 200 separate independent blockchains that are built on top of the Cosmos stack. The Cosmos stack is purpose-built for building L1 blockchains or layer 1 blockchains like Ethereum or Bitcoin. And it comes with a bunch of really cool features out of the box that at the time, and I would argue still are, revolutionary and best in class. So it comes with a interoperability solution called IBC, which lets your blockchain, if built on the Cosmos stack, connect to all the other Cosmos blockchains, and also to connect to non-Cosmos blockchains like Ethereum and Solana and the different L2s. It also comes with a very fast and battle-tested consensus mechanism that was based off of the original design of Tendermint, the first real proof-of-stake consensus mechanism in crypto. Now is called Comet BFT. And then the last piece is the Cosmos SDK, which is a very programmable, modular, building block to build your own application layer on blockchain. So you can think of it kind of like an operating system like Linux. Cosmos Labs, the company that I'm one of the CEOs of, is like the Red Hat, right? We are the Red Hat for the open source stack, which is more like the Linux. And so what we do is we help independent organizations, businesses, enterprises, and governments onboard into crypto by using the open source Cosmos stack and help them build the right tools and the right features and the right assurances so that they can do that in a compliant, they can do that in a safe, and they can do that in an effective way that actually integrates with their business. So what we believe is that at some point in the future, every business will have their own blockchain. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One of the main reasons is that using a blockchain to manage your finances as a company is a lot more effective and cost efficient than using traditional payment rails. You're able to get many of the same assurances around security. You're able to remove many different kinds of middlemen in terms of brokers, in terms of cross-chain transaction fees, or sorry, cross-country transaction fees, in terms of different forms of insurance that you require on kinds of payments, and also collect more for the dollar that you actually transfer around your company. And so where we're starting is we're going to as many companies as we can, and starting really with financial services companies and banks, and saying, hey, how about we upgrade your entire system to a blockchain that you own, right? And so in that way, we see it as a new cloud, right? A while ago, companies were going around trying to upgrade all of these on-prem server systems to be run by a cloud. Now we're trying to upgrade people with cloud-based systems to run on their own blockchain, right? Which we argue is a further iteration of sort of where the internet can go. And then use IBC to connect these different blockchains, right? So once two companies have their own L1 blockchain, it's very easy to connect the two. So all of a sudden now they can start to have basically free stablecoin payments between each company. So they can start to partner with and sign agreements with and build smart contracts around delivery of certain goods or certain contractual agreements that the two companies have. So some of the use cases that we're working on right now, we're working with 5 separate governments to basically launch their CBDC programs, which we're going to be announcing that consortium probably at DevConnect this year, so in November. So we're working with 3 separate governments in Latin America and then 2 governments in Europe. And basically what we're trying to do is each one is going to have their own Cosmos chain. Each one is going to be able to mint an official version of their own currency. And then each one is going to be IBC connected to the other ones so that they can start to do Forex transactions between, right? Usually that means some kind of addition of digital identity so that individual citizens can upload their passports to create accounts, right? So that they can hold this currency and see where it goes, right? I mean, I think right now it's very promising that can be a much better and more fair way of transferring around currency than the existing systems, which are much more opaque. And then on the other side, we do a lot of stablecoin work. So we, Noble is a Cosmos chain. Arc's Arc, which is Circle's chain, is basically based on the same Cosmos technology that we build. Tempo is very similar. Stable is a Cosmos chain that's Tether's L1. And so we do a lot of work on thinking about, okay, how can we make it easier for companies to use an L1 to launch a stablecoin, custody a stablecoin, transfer a stablecoin, and track a stablecoin. And so that's a lot of our work today. And then we're starting to experiment with privacy on that too, because as we know, not everything here can be fully out in the open. So
thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to have a conversation with you, and for such an insightful look into the industry, stablecoin, especially Cosmos, what they are doing. And I'm looking forward to those announcements in November and more developments at Cosmos. And hopefully, we'll be in touch further to collaborate further. So thank you so much for taking out the time and giving this interview to me.